first female staff writer, writing for his television specials, personal appearances, military shows for approximately 15 years. She's an Emmy nominee, Dove Award nominee, WGA Award nominee. Her newest book, written with Linda Hope, is Dear Bob. Bob Hope's wartime correspondence with GIs of World War II. It was named Christian Market Book of the Year and Golden Scrolls Memoir of Year of 2021 Christian Product Expo. It also won first place 2022 Cella Awards for memoir and first place in Chanticleer International Book Awards for Military and Frontline Division. An ABC story about Dear Bob produced by George, how do you say his last name? George, of ABC, won third place in National Journalism Competition and first place in Los Angeles Journalism Competition. The book was also featured on Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley. Beginning with her first book at age 9, she used to like to write poetry at age 9, and this was, I don't know if it's here, I haven't read this yet, but on the way in she told us she used to write jokes when she was little and kept little 3x5 cards of her jokes, and that paid off later on for her. At age 9, titled No Fun Being Young, about being the youngest in her family. That's cute. Martha has now written 88 books, wow, including novels, Joshua for President and The Home Game. She has also written for such comedians and entertainers as Phyllis Diller, Wayne Newton, Mark Lowry, and Chonda Pierce. The winner of 4 Angel Awards, Martha is also a prolific playwright with productions in 5 states. Wow, this goes on and on. Let her tell you. Please welcome Martha. Thank you for being here. Yay.
Well, thank you, and thank you for that nice introduction.
Absolutely.
I was introduced once as a woman who wrote for Bob Hope, Phyllis Diller, and Mark Twain. So that was a lot better. Well, it's great to be here and celebrate Audie Murphy Day here in Texas with all of you. Did you know that Bob Hope and Audie Murphy had a lot in common? They both came from large families. Audie was one of 12 children, and Bob was the 5th of 7 sons. They were both actors, and they moved to North Hollywood. They both lived in North Hollywood. They were both featured on the cover of Life magazine. In fact, it was actor James Cagney who saw Audie on the cover and invited him to come to Hollywood and try his hand at acting. And those of you that know, it was James Cagney who challenged Bob to a dance-off in the movie The Seven Little Foys. And it was one of the greatest dance routines ever recorded. So they had that in common, James Cagney. And Audie and Bob were both authors. And they were both 2 of America's greatest heroes. Audie was the highest decorated soldier in U.S. history, and by an act of Congress, Bob was named America's first volunteer veteran. He was an honorary veteran for his 50 years of entertaining the troops. I never had the pleasure of meeting Audie, but I did know and write for Bob Hope for 15 years. And this morning I'd love to share some of the behind-the-scenes stories of Bob, as the book was Linda's and my tribute to Bob, and I love telling people what he was like behind the scenes. Being a writer for Bob Hope meant you had to write fast. One of our toughest deadlines was he was going to a psychiatrist convention, and we wrote all the material. He packed it all up and went to the venue where they were having it. Well, when he got there, he discovered that it wasn't a psychiatrist convention, it was a chiropractor's convention. A little bit of difference. So we got the call, and we had about 15 minutes before he went on stage to write all new material about chiropractors. Being a writer for Bob Hope meant you didn't get a lot of sleep. We would get calls at all hours of the night because he would be in different time zones. So wherever he was at, it may have been a normal time, but it may have been 2 o'clock in the morning where you were at. So one of my favorite stories is one of the Bob called one of the writers, and his wife picked up the phone. So Bob said, "Is your husband there?" And it was well past midnight. And she looked over at her husband, who was sleeping soundly, and for once she just didn't have the heart to wake him up. So there was this pause, and Bob said, "Is your husband there?" And so she thought, and then she said, "Well, no, he told me he was going to be with you tonight." So then now Bob pauses, and he goes, "Oh yeah, here he comes now." Writing for Bob Hope could be dangerous. We would drive his material. This was before fax machines. After fax machines came in, it got a little easier, but before fax machines, he lived about, 20 miles away from us? And we would get the assignment, and we'd have to drive it to his house. And this one time I was delivering material, and his dog's name was Snow Job. Did you ever meet Job?
I never met him.
His dog's name was Snow Job, and as I was leaving, he came up and just sniffed my foot and then bit me right at the top of my foot. Oh, it hurt. But the next day, Bob sent me a telegram that said, "Dear Martha, please come back soon. I'm ready for another hors d'oeuvre. Love, Snow Job." Sometimes when you told people you wrote for Bob Hope, or worked for Bob Hope even, they didn't believe you, like what happened to his secretary. She was calling to get him a room for him at a hotel, and the clerk didn't believe that she was getting a room for Bob Hope and thought it was a prank call. So she kept giving her a hard time, and the secretary said, "No, seriously, I'm trying to book a room for Bob Hope." And she said, "Do you want me to get him on the phone for you?" And the person on the clerk at the hotel said, "Yeah, why don't you do that?" Just calling her bluff. Well, the secretary then got Bob on the phone, and then, explained the situation, and then Bob got on the phone with the clerk, and he just didn't say a word, but just started singing "Thanks for the Memory," and the clerk hung up on him. So I had 3 boys. When I was writing for him, our kids were little. I had 3 young boys, and sometimes they had to take the phone messages when Bob would call. And I came home, and there was this note written on a napkin that said, "Bob Hope's going to the doctor tomorrow and needs jokes." So I'm thinking, okay, we used to get weird assignments like that. But I thought, well, I'll write a bunch of doctor jokes. And then I thought, well, I better call and just double check and make sure what it is. And what it was, he was receiving an honorary doctorate. And a little bit of a difference there, too. If you wrote for Bob Hope, you had to love to laugh, because Bob loved laughter. He loved jokes. He couldn't get enough of them. When he would come back from wherever he appeared and, some of your jokes played, he'd call you up personally and tell you which ones played and said, "Give me some more of those, because I really like, that one really went well." We wrote thousands of jokes. There was one weekend that there were between 7 writers. We wrote over 2,000 jokes, because it was we'd get the topics, and you'd get like 25 topics, and you'd do 20 jokes a piece. But that time, right, we did the math, and it was over 2,000 jokes for that one show. The jokes are all now in the Library of Congress. And there's 85,000 pages of jokes and well over 500,000. And you could go up there and you just look up the topic and you could look them all up. It's pretty fun. And writing for Bob, you also had to know how to write politics, but he never took a side. He was an equal opportunity jokester. He would joke about Democrats, he would joke about Republicans. His philosophy was, no one party can fool all the people all the time. That's why we have 2 parties. And he was friends and golfed with and entertained all the presidents in his adult lifehood. And he says he was invited to the White House so many times he referred to it as his favorite bed and breakfast. He might have even ran for president had he was born in England, so he couldn't. But he was okay with that because he said that his wife Dolores wouldn't have wanted to move to a smaller house. And Bob was genuinely nice. That's what everybody wants to know, is what was he like behind the scenes? He was a genuinely wonderful beyond measure, but just a nice, nice boss. Never said an unkind word to me in 15 years. He was that kind of a boss. And when my son was doing a junior high school report, he had to do it on a famous person, and he chose Bob Hope. So he did some research, and then he asked me if I thought Bob would let him interview him. And so as a mom, you're thinking, well, you know, it's Bob Hope, and this is a junior high school report. But I thought, well, I'll let him call the secretary and let her handle it and let him, you know, decide. And she called up to Bob, and Bob took the call, and he let my son interview him for 20 minutes for this junior high school report. My son got a B. The teacher said he would have given him an A had he not made up that story about interviewing Bob. One of my favorite memories, though, happened at Bob's 90th birthday party. We did a 3-hour television special, and for, you know, anybody that was anybody, but a lot of those people then came to a private party for Bob's closest 500 friends or whatever. And Dolores had thrown it, and it was an awesome party, and everybody was there, including several presidents. Well, Ronald Reagan was there, and I thought, boy, I would like to get my picture taken with Ronald Reagan if I could arrange it. So I told my husband, I'm going to try to get close enough to him that it looks like we're talking. And if you ever see that moment, snap the picture. Well, everybody else had the same idea, so I couldn't get close. But when they gave the call for dinner, there were these big tents set up out in the backyard, and they gave the call for dinner, I'm walking along the walkway toward it, and I look up, and there's Ronald Reagan walking right in front of me. So I hurried up and asked him if he would mind taking his picture with me, and he was so gracious and said, you know, no, not at all, you know. So I told my husband, and then he got ready with the camera, and it was after 8. It was kind of dark, and pretty dark actually, but anyway, we had a flash, so I wasn't worried. So we posed, my husband took the picture, and the flash did not go off. So I thanked him, and then he turned to me and he said, well, would you like to try again? And I said, you don't mind, really? And he goes, no, we'll do it again. So we posed again. My husband took the picture again, and the flash did not go off again. So I thanked him and went on, and the next day I took it down to a development store and praying that something would turn out. Well, when I picked it up, it was nothing. It was just a black negative. But I got it enlarged and framed it and hung it on my wall. Because I know it's me and Ronald Reagan. Well, I was telling that story at an event, and afterwards, a man came up to me and he said, did you ever get that picture? And I said, no, I had my 2 chances and I blew it. And he said, well, maybe I can help. He pulls out his card. It was Michael Reagan, Ronald Reagan's son. The next week I get a call to come down to the office and get my picture taken, not only with me with him, but he did each one of my family members with him, all of my kids with him alone, and then all of us together.
Wow.
So it turned out so much better than it would have turned out otherwise. But that's just who he was. He was just a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful boss. And watching Bob at the show tapings, we got to see firsthand what the veterans meant to him and what he meant to the veterans. And it was just remarkable to watch that. And he would do anything for them, and they would do anything for him. And I got the opportunity to work on a project where we got to read some of the letters from World War II. And through those letters, I was blown away at how close that relationship was. He was no celebrity. These weren't soldiers writing to a celebrity. These were soldiers writing to a buddy. And he wrote back as a buddy. They joked around with each other. They sent him different, anything that they found, they sent him souvenirs, but it was beyond that. And then, of course, you had the letters where they told of what they lost, and their buddies, and this and that, and he was there at the height of the war. He was receiving 28,000 letters a week from all over, you know, fans and GIs and all of that. Well, when Bob was alive, I got to talk to him about those letters, and I said, you know, these would make a wonderful book, just from the words of the soldiers themselves. And Bob said that he couldn't go through them again, just emotionally, but for me to talk to Linda, his daughter, who was producing the shows at the time, and to see, you know, see what she thought, and maybe, you know, we would do that. So we did, and I started working on it. She had grown up with the letters, and they were kept in boxes, these dozens and dozens and dozens of boxes. And she always wondered what they were. She ended up doing a high school report on them, and so they were dear to her heart as well. So we took this on as a labor of love and started working on it. And then, as what happens in Hollywood, you get onto you know, projects, but that always stayed with us. And then Bob, unfortunately, we had to lose him at 100. He lived to be 100, but he did pass on. So I wasn't sure where the book stood at that point, but about 5 years ago, well, about 5 years ago, I guess, she contacted me and said, do you want to get back on that book? So I was thrilled. Just like I said, it was just to be able to tell that story, that part of life. And so we got it, and then COVID hit. It was supposed to come out that year, but it did come out, and we're just thrilled at the response, and to give a voice to all of those soldiers that gave their life for us and fought in that war. In one of the soldiers' letters, he told a story about where he and his company went to the show, and they had to walk miles to get there. And by the time they got there were so many thousands and thousands of soldiers already there, they couldn't really see or hear him, so they just turned around and started walking back. Well, Bob got word of that, and after the show, he got into a Jeep with some other celebrities, and they drove him out, found that company on the road, parked, and put on a private show just for them. And the soldier was writing to thank Bob for that. Another thing that Bob did is if soldiers would come up to him at the shows and hand him their mother's phone number. And when Bob got home, he would spend days and weeks calling these moms and telling them that he had seen their son or daughter and how they were doing. Bob's last military show was when he was 88 years old, and he was climbing in and out of helicopters to go out there and bring hope to these kids. At 88, that's pretty remarkable. And you wonder if he was ever in any real danger, which he absolutely was at times, for sure. In fact, during the Vietnam War, Barney McNulty, his cue card guy, he made the troop late for their arrival to their hotel because he was organizing all the cue cards. But Barney earned his paycheck that day because the delay saved all their lives. They found out when they got there that the hotel that he was arriving at had been bombed, and they were all safe because of the delay. And on August 14th, 1944, a lot of people don't know this, but Bob and his troop were flying to Australia, and Bob thought he'd try his hand at flying the plane. Well, through no fault of Bob's, though, the plane's engine failed about that time, and the pilot had to make an emergency landing in the Camden River below, and Bob and his entire troop were on that plane at the time. The plane came to rest on a sandbar, but had it hit the sandbar at too high of a speed, most likely they say that it would have somersaulted and exploded. They landed in the little town of Lorryton, and the town was so surprised to have all these celebrities drop out of the sky that they talked Bob into putting on a show at the local high school, and then they all did the hokey pokey until 4 o'clock in the morning. And to this day, they celebrate the day Hollywood came into their town with an annual event. Bob continued to bring hope to our troops for 50 years. Neither Audie Murphy nor Bob Hope were quitters. They each completed their missions, and they didn't waste a single opportunity to make a difference in the world. At Bob's funeral, one of the speakers talked about the ministry of Bob Hope, because Bob had probably seen more young men and women just before their death than a lot of pastors and priests. In one show alone, before the invasion of Peleliu in 1944, approximately 60% of the audience did not make it the next day in the battle, out of the battle. Bob Hope and Audie Murphy gave us their all and then some. May they always be remembered.
Yeah.